Thank you for having me. As Jacob said, my name is Ryan Scholz. I'm the State Veterinarian with the Oregon Department of Agriculture. One of my office's responsibilities is assisting counties and local jurisdictions with animal needs and disasters. He asked me if I could come just share a few tips and tricks for evacuation with livestock, especially since this is really a rural area focused presentation. Livestock tend to be involved when there's fires or really any disasters. I was gonna I've only got just a couple of slides here. If I can get it to go, there we go. The couple quick points that I wanted to hit on was similar to for your own family, your household, having a written evacuation plan that covers your livestock, covers your farm is really important, especially if you may be out fighting that fire. Having something written down that your family members, your neighbors, your friends that are helping can follow, and then being prepared. That the preparations, when I give these kind of talks to areas like here in the Willamette Valley where I'm from, where fires tend to be in heavily wooded areas, tend to be slower moving, you have some time after a fire starts to make some preparations. In the gorge, whereas the sheriff mentioned, you guys tend to have hot, fast moving fires. You may not have that time to prepare after a fire is burning. You're going to go from 0 to 60 pretty quick. So having a lot of those preparations made, at the beginning of fire season, when we know there's going to be a wind event coming up, when we know that there's an elevated risk. And then a couple just quick pointers on the actually evacuating with your animals and when to do that. So first off, when you're writing an evacuation plan, couple just things to think about. What are the hazards and risks in your area? I know that the main purpose of this meeting was to talk about fires, but there's a lot of other situations that can arise. Flooding, power loss, severe thunderstorms, wind events. A lot of those, whether it's an evacuation or a sheltering in place situation, there's special needs when you have livestock that may need to be taken into account in those preparations. Another really important thing is maintaining an accurate inventory. It's important for you have all your animals when you're trying to load them all up. It's important so that that if you take your animals to an evacuation point, that you get all of those animals back at the end of the evacuation. It's also really important if you aren't able to evacuate some of your animals, so that what needs to be looked for, or if in a worst case scenario, if you lose animals, that you can get either insurance or indemnity on those animals, especially if we're talking large numbers of livestock. For more of the farm pet type livestock, horses, those kind of things, vaccination and test records may also be an important thing to have. In many cases, those are things you can just kind of maintain take a picture of it and maintain that on your phone, and makes it pretty easy to keep track of. Having your animals identified somehow is really important also, especially if you end up moving those livestock to an evacuation point, either where there's other livestock present or to a congregate shelter type setting. Being able to identify those animals and identify them as yours is really important. Just a couple different ways, people who have livestock tend to know how their animals are identified, especially cattle, sheep, goats, tend to have ear tags, those kind of identifiers. Horses can be a little bit more difficult though. Sometimes you don't have ear tags in horses. You don't have some of those real visible identifiers. A fair number of horses will have lip tattoos. Any horses that have been involved in racing at any point in their life will have lip tattoos. That's an important thing to know if you do. If you have a Mustang that came out of BLM projects, they'll have a freeze brand on their neck that corresponds to an identification number. Some other ideas that people use a lot of times, especially in an evacuation situation, even just like a luggage tag braided into the mane or the tail of that horse that you can write your name, contact information on, so that if you get separated from those animals, they can make their way back. A couple other things just to consider when you're planning for evacuations, planning for livestock and disasters. Having alternate power and water sources, some sort of idea for that. If you're out in the country and you're relying on well water, do you have a way to run that well if the power is out to be able to get water for your livestock? If you have livestock that you have a dairy or something like that, do you have alternate power to be able to run your milking machines to be able to keep the chiller going? Have some pre-identified evacuation sites that you can haul your livestock to, whether it's a friend on the other side of town, whether it's the fair, that the fairgrounds is going to have a shelter site, whatever that is. Have a couple of sites in mind and in writing, and know how to get there. Have maps showing how to get there, so that in the heat of the moment, you're not stressing trying to figure out the best route to get there. If you don't have your own vehicles to move livestock, have arrangements. If you're going to haul your horse to a friend who's got a couple extra stalls at their place, do you need to make arrangements with them for them to haul it? Do you need to make arrangements with someone else? And then if your animals are not used to being loaded in a trailer, condition them to being loaded ahead of time. That's one of the biggest issues that people run into when they're trying to evacuate livestock is, you run into the people who have a couple steers in their pasture that they raise each year. Those animals have never been loaded. They don't have facilities to load them. Those animals probably aren't going to get evacuated if you can't quickly get them into a trailer. So making sure that those animals are conditioned, used to being hauled under stressful situations is important. And then, if you are arranging an alternate evacuation site, especially if you've got lots of livestock that you're going to be looking at moving, planning ahead for, do you need to have handling equipment there? Do you need to potentially have veterinary care? Do you need to have feed and water delivered potentially to that evacuation facility? Those kinds of things, just things to think about as you're going through and planning stuff. The next thing to do is have an evacuation kit. This is something that ideally you kind of keep set up similar to your personal go kit that you should have. Having one for your livestock as well. This 7 to 10 day supply of feed and water. That's not necessarily critical if you know that in that setting you can get to a feed store or get somewhere else that would have food and water. But having that much on hand so that if you have a winter storm or some other situation where you're having a shelter in place, making sure that you have enough food and water on hand. Cleaning supplies, you can kind of go through the list there. A lot of it's going to be similar to what you would pack if you're going to take your animals to fair or to a show, to be able to be ready. One of the big things though is, if you're taking halters, if you're taking blankets, that kind of stuff for your livestock, try really hard to not use nylon. That nylon, when it is exposed to heat, is going to melt, and that's not a situation you want to be in. So, cotton rope halters, cotton blankets, those kinds of things really are ideal. Just a quick table of, if you're unsure how much food and water you're going to need, going through some of the different livestock species, some of them have fairly significant requirements depending on time of year and life stage. As much as 9 to 10 gallons of water per day for a lot of the cattle, and quite a bit of hay as well, for some of our larger livestock species. Most of them, other than swine, can survive on just hay alone, even if they're normally being fed grain for a short-term evacuation. Feeding them just hay is going to be enough to keep them alive and keep them going. So a couple of other things to consider for preparing prior to the high risk periods is ensuring that you've got plenty of defensible space around your structures. I know there's going to be more discussion about that later, but give yourself as much time as possible to get those animals out, get them to safety. Keep an eye on the stability and safety of structures. Remove dead trees, other debris in your fields. Just overall doing things to keep your pastures, keep your property safe, so that you have as much time as possible to safely get in there and get those animals out. Um, another thing that's often forgotten about is in situations where you're not evacuating, but where you're sheltering in place, you have severe thunderstorms, floods. There are some significant hazards that can be posed to animals in their normal pastures. In flood situations, if your barn is in an area that's going to be flooded, you do not want your animals in that barn or anywhere they can get into that barn. Similar, if we're looking at severe thunderstorms, keeping livestock away from trees. Trees are often conduits for lightning, and anything standing underneath them is liable to become a conduit. I've seen that happen with livestock. I've unfortunately seen that happen with people even. Staying away from tall trees and thunderstorms is really important. And we see cattle die every year from those lightning strikes from being under trees. The other thing is making sure that vehicles that are going to be used for evacuation are maintained and that you keep them fueled. Don't park that truck at the end of the night under an eighth of a tank of gas, because you're not going to have enough to get it hooked up to the trailer and get yourself out of there in the middle of the night if something happens. So just to finish up with some tips on evacuations and kind of what to do when. Make sure you're staying informed. Follow instructions from your local emergency management, from your sheriff, law enforcement. But when you're dealing with livestock, plan to be leaning forward. Plan to go at an earlier stage than you would if it's just you and your family members. So that traditional level 1, level 2, level 3 of be ready, be set, and go. If you still have livestock at home when you hit a level 3, you're going to get one chance to get them out, and you're probably not going to get back in. So waiting till a level 3 to move those livestock is not what we want to be doing. But a level 1, and these are somewhat dependent on the incident and how fast it's moving. But in a normal level 1, where you're normally thinking about getting ready, that's the time to bring the animals up close to the barn, up close to where you would be loading them from. You don't want to be having to go round them up out of the backfield when you're into a level 2, level 3 situation. Top off water troughs and water containers so that you're ready to go. Make sure vehicles are fueled, trailers are ready. Ideally, hook that trailer up to your truck and be ready to pull. Make sure the evacuation kit's in the truck or in the trailer. If you have animals that are particularly difficult to load, or animals with special needs, that level 1 might be a good time to get them moved out of there, especially if you're going to have to make multiple trips. Something to consider, though, is I don't know how your counties are, but in many counties, they really don't want to take livestock into a congregate shelter that's being run by the county at a level 1, just because they're trying to reserve that limited space for people who are in immediate need of evacuation. So if you're in a situation where you think you would have animals you're going to be needing to evacuate at a level 1, those are situations where it's important to try and make arrangements ahead of time with friends, with family, with people on the other side of town, or in areas that are unlikely to be affected by the same incident as you. So level 2 is where you want to be. If you've got livestock, you really want to be trying to get them out of there. Your vehicle should be hooked up to the trailer at that point. If you need any help evacuating, make sure that help is on their way, whether that's friends, family, or if you need to, call neighbors, call whoever, make sure that you're doing that by then. And then begin evacuating your livestock. The last thing you want to do is wait till the last minute, take the first load out, and then not be allowed back in because it bumped up to a level 3 while you were taking your first load and you can't get back to take the second load. We see that happen pretty frequently. And when those cattle get left in a corral, they don't have a whole lot of chance if that area does burn. So if the other thing is to use your common sense. Listen to your gut. If you don't feel safe in a situation, regardless of what the evacuation level is, don't wait to evacuate. Oftentimes your gut's telling you that for a reason. We saw that during the Labor Day fires, that those fires move so fast, and I know that happens up in the gorge sometimes too. But the fires sometimes early on are moving faster than the evacuation levels and the announcements are going out. So at a level 3, get out of there immediately. Don't wait. If it's unfortunate to say it, but don't risk your life for that of your animals. In fast moving events, you may not be able to save all of your animals and get all of your animals out of there if you're in a level 3. If you do leave animals behind, report those to emergency services, so that after the fire moves through, when it's still in an evacuation level, arrangements oftentimes can be made to go in and care for those animals. It may not be you that is able to do it, but oftentimes the county will have people, or we've been called upon on a number of occasions to send crews in that are able to provide care for those animals that are still left behind. But just know that if you, as you're evacuating, in a level 3, you likely will not be allowed back in to make a second trip. So just be prepared for that when you go grab everything you need and get out of there. So with that, that's just a really quick overview. It's evacuation with livestock is one of those things that it's really very situation dependent. And so, going through and looking at your operation, what animals you have that may need to be evacuated and what your options are is really important. There's a couple links there for some really good resources. That Prep for Ag Threats is a really good resource that was put together. Can't remember what state put it together, but it was through Cooperative Extension that it was done. But it goes through a number of different farming operation types, and then the different disasters that may present themselves, and what to do in preparation, what to do during an event, and then what to do after you return back home to make sure things are safe. So that's a really good resource to look at. With that, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer questions.